Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Juru wash processed Rwanda from Wide Awake Coffee. And there's the bag right there. And Wide Awake, based out of Manila, Philippines, and this is their second ever appearance on this channel, having previously reviewed the Mount Apo, a lactic honey processed Filipino coffee. And as is usually the case when reviewing a new roaster for the first time, we like to review one of their washed and one of their non-washed offerings, with this one of course being the non-washed representative. And it did sound like a pretty interesting coffee, as this one finished second place in the Rwandan Cup of Excellence, and there's also more of a backstory behind this coffee. As we initially placed this order with Airworks when they were bringing in Wide Awake, and then after a couple of months during a meeting that we did have with Airworks, we asked them what happened to our Wide Awake order, and Airworks essentially said to us, that explains why we had one extra bag, so Airworks just forgot to give us this bag of coffee. So for that reason, the review on this one is definitely a little bit later than we probably would have done had we received it on time, but it'll still be interesting to see how this one turned out, as this right here is day 76. And recipe we went with for this coffee was our standard recipe, and a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 96 degrees Celsius, about 205 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the V60, which does indicate a more medium fine grind. Roast profile for this coffee, I don't quite recall too much the profile of the first one that we did review from them, though it did sound like it might have been just slightly more developed given the processing of that coffee. This one was originally marketed as being their ultra light profile, as I do believe that they went a bit lighter on this one than they would otherwise, and they did suggest a minimum of 4 weeks worth of rest before starting this coffee. That being said, I wouldn't necessarily identify it as being an ultra light coffee. It's definitely lighter than I might have expected based off of a lot of the other coffee roasters in that region as well. So I would say that it did turn out a fair bit lighter than a lot of the Japanese based coffee roasters we've reviewed on this channel, but not necessarily on par with some of the true ultralights that we review from Asia as well. So I guess I can say it's kind of a more moderately light, maybe a little bit more development than that by most standards and metrics. With all that out of the way, let's go and start discussing this coffee. Day 54, first impression. So as mentioned, started this coffee a little later than we would have otherwise, but we did opt for the V60, and one of the strange things about this coffee, and it kind of alludes to the profile of it, was that it was a fair bit more papery than expected, especially given how late it was from the roast date of this one. So I can get some papery characteristics from a lot of lighter profile coffees, but having it be present at the day 54 mark could have possibly been just because it's when we opened the coffee. I mean, given that this coffee was already, 7 weeks past its roast date, I figured that opening the bag, we might get the first initial good brew of this coffee and see how it goes from there. But it honestly felt like the best of this coffee was probably already behind it, as it did offer a lot of the classic honey Rwandan-like characteristics to it, which, I mean, they have a honey note list on here, that pretty prominent wildflower-like honey quality. In addition to that, I can definitely see a fair bit of the listed blossom characteristics, because it just has that really strong savoriness as well. So it was, interestingly, a positive first impression. The papery characteristic wasn't necessarily ideal, but given that it had much more intensity than I would have expected for a coffee that I assumed was well past its best, did lead to a solid first impression. Day 56 through the Chemex, and there was a similar sentiment, as it does feel like this coffee might already have passed its peak, as it feels a little toned down, primarily in terms of the lack of brightness with the expectations that we would have for a Rwandan coffee, with a bit more of a generic honey quality yet again, and plenty of the savoriness and herbal characteristics. So think of what you'd expect from a Rwandan coffee. That's what this coffee has been as of this moment, just a little bit toned down overall. Day 58 through the UFO brewer, and the coffee was surprisingly pretty solid, so I can't help but shake the feeling that the coffee might have the best of it behind it, but it did have some pretty well-defined red berry qualities to go along with that black tea savoriness, but it's been pretty clean and direct, a little bit of those herbal characteristics to it. I mean, one of the issues I have when it comes to reviewing Rwandan coffees is oftentimes they can be very similar. This is pretty similar to a lot of other Rwandan coffees we've reviewed in the past, but it didn't have any of the defective qualities or characteristics, so in that sense, with a bit more intensity, it could be a really nice experience. Day 60 through the V60 with some lower extraction adjustments, so 15-1 at 93 Celsius, and the coffee does continue to hold up well. The only criticism I had for this coffee was that it was very one-dimensional, so very savory black tea, very herbal, a little bit of citrus, and a little bit of the red fruit characteristics, but it's just so direct by how overwhelmingly intense that black tea, honeyed, herbal quality, and it's just so synonymous with Rwandan coffees that I feel like if I mention that for a Rwandan coffee, you have a pretty good idea of what I'm referencing. Day 65 through the Chemex with the same adjustments, and as expected, there's very little change as the coffee has been extremely consistent, but it does seem to perform better in the V60, largely due to the intensity it offers. The Chemex just seemed to strip what little intensity there was of it, as it feels like we were going to ramp up this coffee to see if that might change some of the results. Day 67 through the V60 with some higher extraction adjustments, so 17-1 at 99 Celsius. And there's a little bit more to this coffee, as it's not necessarily the best, as it did seem to highlight and accentuate more of the papery characteristics, with which I'd completely forgot was present within this one. Additionally, a bit more brightness, as it does cool down with more intensity to the red fruit quality, so it was better. I kind of liked the transition that this coffee undertook when we pushed it a little bit more, as you felt the characteristics just a little bit better defined and separated. Day 70 through the Chemex with the same adjustments, and it's still just okay. Perhaps one of the least impressive days is we really couldn't get a good experience with this coffee through this brew method, as it's just offering a generic Rwandan-like feel without much outside of the generic honey, black tea, savoriness once again. So on day 73, we opted for the V60 with our standard recipe, and the coffee is surprisingly the best it's been to this point, as it's offering a little bit more depth outside of that one note black tea, honey, herbal quality, with a more pronounced lemon zest, a cranberry wine-like brightness. So for whatever reason, the brightness just felt a little bit better today. Some subtle dried apricots with less of the papery characteristics as well. So I would say that this was probably one of the better balanced experiences as well. All right, so let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have quite a few level 4s. Let's go through them. We will start with the cleanliness level 4. As I took that sip, I can actually get a little bit of a mint characteristic to it as well. But cleanliness level 4. It is pretty clean. There isn't anything to really take away from this coffee whatsoever. I mean, some Rwandan coffees can have some defects, but this has nothing of the sorts. It's very direct, it's very well defined. If anything, it's even on the cleaner side for a Rwandan coffee. It's just lacking the intensity that I think could push that over the top. So level 4, where we opted to put that. Let's go ahead and move on to the finish level 4. I have a suspicion that the finish could probably be closer to a level 5 where this coffee at its peak, because after I took that sip, got that slight mint characteristic to it, I feel like that the main reason it's not more lingering and long lasting is because it's just past its best. So level 4 is still where we opted to put that. It does have a lot of the kind of long lasting savory black tea finish to it. Acidity level 4. That's also kind of interesting, because I do wonder where this coffee would be maybe on some of its earlier days too, if that acidity would have been ramped up a little bit more, but it still has plenty of it. It does skew a little bit more in a citric sense, as there's that kind of sharp lemon zest quality as of this moment anyway. So level 4, where we opted to put that. Florality level 4, the honey characteristic of this one is very intense, so that's one of the main reasons why we put that as high as we did. Given the coffee has a pretty clean base to begin with, having a lot of the honey characteristics and the black tea characteristics really aren't surprising. Citrus fruit level 4. I do feel like most of the days up to this last day, we probably would have kept that at a level 3, but on this last day, the citrus just seems to be a bit more prominent. So level 4, where we opted to put that. Savoriness level 4, that's not a surprise whatsoever. It is just so black tea dominant throughout the entirety that it would have been a shock otherwise if it didn't reach that level 4 mark. A couple of level 3s. We will start with the sweetness level 3. I don't think that the focus of this coffee was the sweetness, but I'm going to continue to go back to the notion that this coffee on its earlier days is probably closer to a level 4 for the sweetness. I feel like a lot of these notes are probably higher if this coffee is at its peak, but the sweetness is one that I decided to keep just a little bit lower because it was outpaced by the brightness and the very dominant savoriness. Spice level 3. That classic Rwandan spiced characteristic, that herbal characteristic that is so synonymous with Rwandan coffees, that we had to put that there at that level 3 mark. Let's go ahead and move on. Berry fruit level 3. What did we mention on that one? It has that slight cranberry wine-like quality because it does have a little bit of tartness to it, and yeah, for that reason, it's pretty high in that. Stone fruit level 3, mentioned some dried apricots, though as I'm drinking this right now, I don't think it's maybe as pronounced as it was the last time we brewed this coffee. Bitterness level 3, there was a pretty sharp citric bitterness to it. I mentioned lemon zest largely because it's just kind of a little bit more bitter in that citric sense, so that's why we put it there. And then the final thing worth discussing, we have the body at a level 2, not necessarily the most amount of texture, a little bit more of a silky body to it, so that's why we opted to put it there. Outside of that, as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, the tasting wheel itself does look a little strange, but I feel like it's pretty indicative of what you might expect for a Rwandan coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. Obviously, I can't help but shake the feeling that I would be very curious to see how this coffee would have turned out had we started it a lot earlier. And I've actually heard a little bit of feedback on this coffee as well, and the feedback's been positive. People really seemed to enjoy it. I feel like somebody that enjoys a really good Rwandan coffee will enjoy this one, largely because this is vintage Rwandan through and through. I mean, all of the characteristics, all of the qualities are just super Rwandan-like. So we'll just kind of skip ahead to that. The type of person I would suggest this coffee to is somebody that very much enjoys their Rwandan coffees because it has all of that. The very strong, savory characteristics, the red fruit, the citrus, the honey, the herbal qualities. I mean, all of those things in pretty notable abundance. Again, I just kind of wish I would have been able to see what it was like at its best, though it's entirely possible that this is just the way that the coffee would have been even at that stage. So I guess I'll never know. We can only go based off of what we had, but that's also just kind of the best way to leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to hear your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Juru wash processed Rwanda from Wide Awake Coffee. Thank you for watching.